It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday. The kind of morning Helen Brooks always looked forward to, slow, simple, filled with small comforts. The trailer on the ridge was silent except for the hum of the electric kettle and the distant chirping of birds down in the canyon below. Her hands, thin but steady, cradled a warm mug of tea, and on the table next to her, a plate of oatmeal cookies, still untouched, released a faint cinnamon scent. She didn't dress up that morning, no need. Just an oversized lilac sweater and soft gray flannel pants. Her husband, Michael, was downtown working on a case. She had the place to herself and she liked it that way. No schedule. No phone calls. No obligations. Just the wind, the tea, the quiet. Outside, the fog was lifting over the hills of Northern California, revealing the skeleton of their dream home in progress. Wood frames, tarps, and dust. They'd been living in the trailer while building the house. Helen had designed it herself. Open kitchen, big windows, a stone fireplace. Everything was supposed to come together in the spring. She never got to see it finished. At 11:06 a.m., something changed. It started with a sound, soft, unfamiliar. A barely audible rustle behind her. At first she didn't react. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe a squirrel. But then came a creak. A weight against wood. The kind of sound that doesn't belong inside a trailer. Her fingers paused mid-scroll on the tablet. A chill passed over her skin, slow and uninvited. She turned her head slightly, not fully, not yet. Some part of her didn't want to know. But curiosity always wins. She turned all the way. And that's when she saw him. A boy, or maybe a man, dressed entirely in black. His face was hidden behind a ski mask. In one hand he held something. At first she thought it was a large flashlight. But it wasn't. It was a stone. Not just any stone either. A river rock. Smooth, heavy, rounded. Chosen. There was no sound between them. No words. Just eye contact, or what passed for it through a slit in black fabric. She froze. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She dropped the tablet, knocking over the mug. Scalding tea spilled across the floor. She ran. Or tried to. The front door was 6 steps away. She reached the third before he caught her. The stone hit her shoulder first, spinning her sideways. She crashed into the corner of the TV, which toppled with a low thud. Blood smeared onto the screen. Her breath caught. Her leg buckled. But she didn't stop. She kicked at the door, once, twice. Her fingers clawed for the handle. Another blow. This time to the back of her head. The world tilted. She didn't scream. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Later, crime scene investigators would map everything. The impact points, the angle of the blows, the blood spatter. They'd measure footprints, swab handles, photograph droplets. But in that moment, there was only chaos. And pain. And silence. Helen's body collapsed near the threshold. Curled. Defensive. Her bare foot scraped against the attacker's face as she fell, dragging blood from his cheek. Her last act of resistance. He stood over her, panting maybe. Maybe not. No one knows. The next part wasn't fast. He didn't flee. He didn't panic. He stayed. First he went to the kitchen. Opened the cupboard. Took a glass. He filled it with water. He drank it. Then he walked into the bathroom. Showered. His bloody fingerprints later found on the tap, on the edge of the sink, on the mirror. Helen's body lay cooling just steps away. The most chilling part wasn't the brutality. It wasn't even the carved symbol on her back, something grotesque and ritualistic, etched into her skin post-mortem. It wasn't the evisceration or the cracked skull. It was the calm, the deliberate pacing, the confidence. Like he knew, no one would be coming for hours. And he was right. Michael Brooks wouldn't arrive until 6 p.m. By then the blood had dried. The tea had gone cold. The house had fallen back into silence. But something had changed. A quiet morning had turned into a crime scene. And Helen Brooks, who just wanted peace, had been turned into something else. A message, a target, a victim. The sheriff's department would call it one of the most personal murders they'd ever seen. But they were wrong about one thing. There was nothing personal about it. Because the person who did this didn't even know her. He just had a thought. A question. How many blows with a rock does it take to kill someone? And that thought, dark, absurd, grotesque, was no longer just a thought. It had a name now. Helen Brooks. The sun was just beginning to dip below the ridgeline when Michael Brooks turned off the gravel road and coasted his Jeep to a stop near the trailer. He could already feel the dust settling on the windshield, the wind calmer than usual. Saturdays always ended like this, quiet, golden, predictable. But something about the stillness today didn't feel right. The first thing he noticed was Helen's car, parked unusually close to the porch. That was odd. She had planned to attend the matinee ballet in Redwood City. She'd been looking forward to it all week. It was her moment of escape, art, music, movement. But her sedan hadn't moved. Michael leaned forward in his seat, squinting at the trailer. There were no lights on inside. No movement. Then he stepped out of the car. The air smelled different. Heavy. Like turned soil or wet copper. He grabbed the grocery bag from the trunk. Nothing fancy, just almond milk, cereal, a bouquet of grocery store tulips, and walked toward the front door. And that's when he saw the blood. A thin, dark smear led from the doormat and pooled just beneath the frame. Michael froze. His mind snapped between disbelief and denial. Maybe Helen had dropped something. Maybe it was paint. Maybe. But the smell. He knew that smell. Michael had spent 20 years as a criminal defense attorney. He'd walked crime scenes, sat in on autopsies, picked apart gory photo evidence in airtight courtrooms. But this was his doorstep. He dropped the groceries and rushed forward. The trailer door was ajar. He nudged it open slowly, almost too afraid to look inside. Then he saw her, curled near the entrance, face turned toward the wall, bare feet visible. His mind couldn't process the whole image, only fragments. Her hair matted, a broken television, the blood, so much blood. He dropped to his knees. Helen? He placed trembling fingers on her neck. No pulse. His breath left him in a ragged exhale. And then the grief came, primal and shattering. No, Helen, please. His voice echoed off the cheap trailer walls, bouncing between grief and disbelief. He cradled her shoulders, murmuring things he never used to say out loud. I love you. Don't go. What happened to you? Who did this? Then came the rage, the need for justice. The lawyer inside him still knew the procedure. He fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. My wife is dead, he told the dispatcher. She's been murdered. Please, send someone. By the time deputies arrived, the scene had already begun to decompose into chaos. Yellow tape, flashlights, cameras clicking, people murmuring outside the perimeter, neighbors, looky-loose news crews. One deputy helped Michael into the back of a cruiser. They needed a statement, but first he needed space. His hands were still shaking. His mind looping through that one image, her body bent near the door, so close to getting out. Detective Shannon Farrow was first on scene. She was 48, steel-eyed, no nonsense. Years in homicide had numbed her to a lot of things. But something about this one hit different. There was no forced entry. No signs of robbery. No sexual assault. Just raw brutality. Helen Brooks had been bludgeoned, possibly with a blunt stone. Her skull had multiple fractures. Several teeth were dislodged. Her scalp had torn. A symbol had been carved into her back, shallow but deliberate. Not initials, not random. Some kind of ritual? Even worse, the killer had stayed. Took a glass of water. Took a shower. He wasn't in a rush. That meant he either knew the area well, or knew no one was coming. In the following hours, police conducted a preliminary timeline. Helen was last seen alive at 10:48 a.m., when she replied to a neighbor's text. By 11:06 a.m., her smart speaker registered no further audio cues. Michael left home at 8 a.m. and arrived back at 6:04 p.m. His alibi was airtight. Multiple witnesses confirmed he was in court all morning and picked up groceries around 4:30 p.m. He wasn't a suspect. But the whispers started anyway. Because when a woman is murdered in her own home, statistically, the husband is involved. News crews circled the trailer like vultures. Prominent lawyer's wife slain in luxury home site. Was this personal? Did someone target Helen, or was this meant for Michael? But there was no answer, yet. At Helen's funeral the following week, Michael sat stone-faced. He never cried in public, but his hands trembled so violently that a friend had to help him hold the urn. People spoke of Helen's kindness, her quiet wisdom, her deep laugh. They remembered her obsession with puzzles, the way she overused cinnamon, how she once nursed a stray cat back to health for 2 months just to find out it wasn't even a stray. She was that kind of person. Everyone said the same thing. She didn't deserve this. She was just good. She didn't have enemies. Which made the question echo louder in the investigation room. Who would do this? And why Helen? It wasn't long before the case took a strange turn. Because when detectives began canvassing the property, they discovered something odd about the neighboring lot down the hill. A half-built cabin, a strange guest house, and a boy. A boy who lived there. Who walked those hills. Who knew the paths. Who wore long coats. Who never smiled. His name was Ethan Weller, 16 years old, and he had secrets. The blood didn't lie. It had soaked into the porch boards, dried at the edges, darkened into a stubborn maroon stain. Forensics marked it as Point A, the beginning of Helen Brooks' final struggle. Inside the trailer, Point B wasn't far. Just 6 feet from the door. That was where her body had fallen. Between those 2 points, investigators drew a red line, a literal path of resistance. Scratches on the door handle. A faint shoe print and blood just outside. A broken television screen nearby. Each detail whispered something. And all together they screamed one thing. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. Detective Shannon Farrow paced the scene slowly, her gloves slick with powder and sweat. She had worked dozens of domestic homicides, but this one didn't fit. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. No valuables disturbed. And the violence, it was excessive. Personal. Ritualistic even. Helen had fought. That much was clear. A forensic analyst named Burke, young and precise, took note of the bloodstains beneath Helen's right toenails. She kicked him, he said. How hard? Farrow asked. Hard enough to leave his blood behind. That changed things. The attacker wasn't unscathed. That meant they had a sample, a lead. DNA from a stranger mixed with Helen's. Over the next 48 hours, the scene was cordoned off, combed over, catalogued. The entire trailer was processed. Faucets, drinking glasses, even the inside of the microwave. Investigators found smudged fingerprints, some partial, some full, on the bathroom sink, the shower wall, and the glass cup left on the kitchen counter. Whoever had done this hadn't panicked. They stayed, cleaned up, maybe even admired their work. Meanwhile, Detective Farrow turned her attention to the hill. The Brooks property sat atop a sloping lot that shared its border with another parcel, technically undeveloped but occupied nonetheless. On that land sat a weather-beaten cabin, barely habitable, and parked nearby, a second-hand RV covered in pine needles and duct tape patches. That's where Esther Weller lived. And with her, her son, Ethan. They'd moved onto the property the year prior, staying temporarily with friends while the mother looked for stable work. Esther was cordial enough with neighbors, always apologizing for the condition of the cabin, always promising they'd be out by spring. But Michael and Helen didn't mind. They knew hardship. They respected privacy. Helen even brought over muffins once. She and Esther had tea. What? But that was months ago. Lately, Ethan had become more reclusive. The detectives visited the cabin on Tuesday. Esther answered the door in a faded t-shirt and jeans, her hair messy, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She didn't seem surprised to see police. Is this about what happened up the hill? She asked. Farrow nodded. We're talking to everyone in the area, she said. When's the last time you saw or spoke to Helen Brooks? Esther shook her head slowly. I didn't really know her well. My son may have seen her more than I did. And your son? Is he home? No, Esther replied. He's staying with a friend. Farrow glanced inside. The cabin was dim, cluttered, lived in. A laptop sat open on the table. Dishes piled in the sink. A black trench coat was draped over the back of a chair. Mind if we ask Ethan a few questions when he returns? I'll let him know, Esther said a little too quickly. But Ethan didn't return that night. Or the next. By Thursday morning, the case cracked open. Not from forensics, not from surveillance, but from a friend. A teenage boy, no older than Ethan, walked into the sheriff's office with his parents. His hands were visibly shaking. He said he had something to confess. According to his statement, Ethan Weller had been planning something. They weren't just regular teenagers smoking weed and talking music. Ethan was different. He wrote things, graphic things, stories about rituals, revenge, and blood. He kept a notebook filled with drawings of bodies and coded language. He often spoke about what it would feel like to be inside the moment someone dies. And then came the idea. What if we did it? Not in theory. Not in fiction. In real life. The friend didn't believe him at first. But then Ethan showed him something, a symbol scratched into the back of a notebook. He said he wanted to carve it into someone's back. Not to mark them, but to own them. He picked Helen not because she was cruel, not because she wronged him, but because she lived nearby, and because she seemed clean. Farrow listened without blinking. The boy wasn't done. He also admitted that he and Ethan had recently been trying to start a marijuana grow. They needed lighting equipment. Ethan came up with a plan: steal credit card information from neighbors' mail, order the gear, and build their setup. But the order failed. The company flagged it as fraudulent. It was supposed to be shipped to Helen Brooks' address. That's when Ethan panicked. He said Helen might report it. She was in the way. That's when the fantasy turned to decision. The friend got immunity for cooperating. The police issued a warrant for Ethan Weller's arrest. They also returned to the cabin. Esther resisted at first, said she didn't know where Ethan was, claimed she hadn't seen him in days. But eventually, under pressure, she broke down. "He's in the crawl space," she whispered. When officers found him, Ethan didn't resist. He was lying on a mattress in a dark, low-ceiling space beneath the floorboards. Beside him was a backpack. Inside, a hard drive with stolen personal data, a pair of blood-stained boots, a black glove, and a piece of paper with Helen Brooks' name written on it. They didn't have to drag him out. When deputies opened the crawlspace hatch, Ethan Weller didn't fight. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink against the light. He just slowly shifted his body, sat up on the mold-stained mattress, and waited. One of the officers, a seasoned sergeant named Nunez, later described it like this. It wasn't the look of someone scared of being caught. It was like he'd already played this out in his head and was just waiting for the scene to arrive. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and led him past his mother. Esther Weller stood frozen by the cabin door, arms folded tightly across her chest, fingers digging into her sleeves. She didn't reach for him. She didn't ask where they were taking him. She just whispered, "I'm sorry," into the hallway air, not quite loud enough for anyone to hear. But Ethan heard, and he didn't respond. At the station, he said nothing for almost 4 hours. He stared at the wall of the interview room, slouched low in the chair, refusing food and water. 2 detectives rotated through, soft questions, hard ones, silence. Nothing worked. But they didn't need a confession, because the evidence was already speaking. In the backpack recovered from under the cabin floor, officers found a blood-stained pair of boots, later matched to the partial footprint on the Brooks porch. A glove with both Helen's blood and Ethan's DNA inside. A navy ski mask, consistent with fibers found at the crime scene. A small spiral-bound notebook with disturbing illustrations. Disemboweled figures, symbolic markings, cryptic phrases like "ritual reveals control" and "the moment of crossing." Most damning of all was a printed page, folded and crumpled at the bottom of the bag, a receipt from a lighting supply website. It showed an attempted purchase of hydroponic grow lamps. The shipping address? 62 Forest Hill Drive, Helen Brooks' trailer. That single error, a mismatched billing and shipping address, had triggered the company's fraud alert. And now it linked a dead woman to a teenager with a dark fixation, a failed credit card scam, and a motive that had no logic, only obsession. The investigators turned to Esther next. They asked her about the gloves, the bag, the blood. She looked dazed, as if none of it made sense. "I thought it was just about the credit card thing," she murmured. "He said it was nothing. He told me to burn it." "Did you?" "I tried." "Did you know what he did to Helen Brooks?" Silence. Then, barely audible. "Not until I saw her daughter at the hearing. She looked just like Helen. I knew then. I knew my boy. I knew it was true." The DA didn't charge Esther with obstruction. They needed her to testify. She agreed, reluctantly, tearfully, but fully. She turned over everything she had. Receipts, clothes, the half-burnt notebook Ethan tried to destroy. She even handed them a handwritten document Ethan had taped beneath a loose floorboard in the RV. It was titled, "Procedure." It read like a step-by-step plan for abducting and disposing of a human being. Knock them unconscious. Move them to safe location. Cut connection. Phone ID. Extract truth. Then silence. Sign the act. The final line read, "Mark the transition." The transition, detectives later believed, was the symbol carved into Helen's back. Psychologists would later debate whether Ethan Weller suffered from a diagnosed mental disorder. Some argued antisocial personality traits, dissociative detachment, possibly trauma-induced psychopathy. Others weren't convinced, because Ethan, by all appearances, wasn't a broken kid. He was a Boy Scout, played tennis, had good grades until high school. But his life had a fracture line. Her name was Emily. Emily Weller was Ethan's older sister. 3 years ahead of him, full of light and big sister energy. She died in a car crash at 17. A suicidal driver veered across the highway median and hit them head-on. Emily and her 2 friends died instantly. The driver survived. And Ethan changed. Overnight, he went from sociable to silent. He wore all black, grew his hair, started drawing things that made his teachers uneasy. But no one flagged it. No one pulled him aside. He was quiet, not dangerous. At least that's what they thought. until he started writing essays with titles like Living in Reverse, The Final Threshold, Beauty Through Damage. In one paragraph he wrote, "They love animals but they hate people. Maybe I do too. Animals don't lie. People do." His search history filled in the rest. How to destroy DNA evidence. Autopsy knife angle. How many hits to fracture skull with stone? Ski mask material traceable? And perhaps most disturbing, how long can you shower after killing someone before evidence is lost? The prosecution didn't need theatrics. They had science, documentation, testimony, a trail of digital and physical footprints. What they didn't have was remorse. Ethan never cried, never looked up in court, never apologized. The only time he showed emotion was when the autopsy photos were shown, and even then it wasn't grief. It was interest. He leaned forward, mouth slightly open, as if admiring something. Detective Farrow never forgot that moment. She later said, "He didn't kill her to hide anything. He didn't kill her to get away with something. He killed her because he wanted to see what it would be like. And then he stayed to see what it felt like afterward." The courtroom was quiet, but no one could breathe. Helen Brooks' autopsy photos had just been presented, carefully, clinically, black and white to reduce their emotional impact. But it didn't help. People turned away. Some cried. Her daughter covered her face. Even the bailiff looked down. Everyone, except Ethan. He leaned forward, eyes fixed, unblinking, not in horror, not even guilt, just study. He looked as though he was examining the aftermath of a science project. Detective Farrow, testifying on the stand, took a long pause before she spoke again. She had seen autopsy images hundreds of times, but something about the way Ethan responded to them stayed with her. He didn't flinch, she told the court. If anything, he was leaning in. It wasn't just the violence that disturbed the prosecution. It was the preparation. Because Ethan didn't just wake up one morning and decide to kill. He thought about it, wrote about it, tested it. In his confiscated hard drive, they found a series of encrypted folders. Within them, scanned pages of anatomy textbooks, especially focused on skull fracture thresholds and organ positions. Links to archived autopsy footage from Eastern Europe. A PDF titled Quiet Entry, Silent Kill, a manifesto-style breakdown of non-gun homicide methods, including strangulation, bludgeoning, and controlled blood loss. More unsettling was the folder named simply Helen. In it, investigators found a blurred photo of Helen Brooks outside her trailer, taken from a distance, timestamped 6 weeks before the murder. Notes about her routine, when she walked, what time she brewed tea, how long Michael usually stayed away. A sketched diagram of the trailer's interior layout, eerily accurate. And at the bottom, a typed line, center-aligned. 11 a.m., transition begins. The prosecution's theory was clear. This was not a spontaneous act. Ethan Weller had planned every step, from approach to attack to cleanup. He had chosen a time when Helen would be alone. He brought the stone from a nearby creek, selected for its shape and weight. He wore gloves, a ski mask, a long coat. He even brought a change of clothes. What he didn't plan for was resistance. Helen had fought. Her foot had struck his face, leaving a bruise under his eye and DNA under her nails. The resulting panic, prosecutors argued, broke his routine. That's why he lingered afterward. That's why he made mistakes. The defense, for its part, did what it could. They emphasized Ethan's age, just 16. They called psychologists who testified about childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and dissociative episodes. They painted a picture of a boy undone by grief, orphaned emotionally after the death of his sister Emily. They called Esther Weller to the stand. Her voice shook as she spoke of trying to raise Ethan alone. The poverty, the trauma, the long hours, the guilt. "I didn't see it happening," she said through tears. "I thought he was just sad, just grieving." The prosecutor's voice was even, calm. "And when you saw blood on his clothes, what did you do?" Esther hesitated. "I told him to burn it." The courtroom froze. "So you knew?" "No, I suspected. But I wasn't sure. I wanted it to go away. I wanted to protect him." The prosecutor didn't respond. She didn't have to. But for all the defense's efforts, the evidence was overwhelming. Not just forensic, behavioral. After the murder, Ethan went back to school. He joked with classmates. He posted a photo of his boots, the same ones found with Helen's blood on them, with the caption, "New kicks, breaking them in." One of the jurors, an older man with a background in psychology, said it best after the verdict. You could feel that something in him was missing, not broken, just absent. There was no sorrow, no rage, just calculation. The deliberation took less than a day. Ethan Weller was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Because he was a minor, the death penalty was off the table. But the judge handed down the maximum sentence allowed at the time. Life without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent. Not from shock, but from inevitability. Michael Brooks did not speak that day. But weeks later, at a private press conference, he gave a short statement. He said, "Helen was everything good I ever knew. She loved quietly, lived simply, and died terribly. And while that boy will sit in a cell for the rest of his life, I'll spend mine in the shell she left behind." But time changes things, even sentences. In 2018, a new law passed in California, giving juveniles sentenced to life without parole a chance to apply for resentencing. Ethan's case qualified. His sentence was reduced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole. If granted, he could walk free in 2030. Today, Ethan Weller is 36 years old. In prison, he's been described as a model inmate. He tutors GED students. He completed an associate's degree through a correspondence program. He no longer wears black. He doesn't talk about the past. But the case files remain. So do the photos. So does the stain on the porch. And so does one final question. Did he ever feel anything? In every crime scene, there are pieces that don't fit, not because they don't belong, but because they speak in another language. Sometimes it's a torn button. Sometimes a phone left charging. Sometimes it's the silence between two blood drops. And sometimes, it's a symbol carved into someone's back. The coroner who examined Helen Brooks had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a shape associated with gangs or cults. It was abstract, deliberate, meaningful to someone, but only that someone. The carving wasn't deep enough to kill. It was done after she had already died. It was a mark, a signature. Detective Farrow asked Ethan about it once, during a brief pretrial interview. "Why did you do it?" she asked. He looked at her. Not defensive, not smug, just honest. "So I'd remember it wasn't a mistake." That was all he said. And that was all she needed to hear. But as the investigation unraveled more of Ethan's writings, recovered from burned pages, scanned notebooks, encrypted folders, the pieces began to connect. He had a private vocabulary. Words he used differently than the world around him. Transition meant killing. Crossing meant domination. Marking meant finality, the point after which something could never be undone. The carving on Helen's back appeared in several of Ethan's old sketches, in the margins of anatomy diagrams, beside quotes about entropy and consciousness. One note read, "The body is a doorway, but only when you close it does it become a symbol." To the average person, that line made no sense. To the forensic psychologist reviewing the file, it screamed fantasy fulfillment. Helen wasn't just a victim. She was an instrument in some private ritual of power and permanence. The footprint outside the trailer, partially smeared in blood, was matched to a pair of boots found in Ethan's crawlspace. One sole had a small gash across the rubber, a manufacturing defect. That flaw left a unique arc in the print, as distinct as a fingerprint. But what made the print important wasn't just the match. It was its position. It stood in the opposite direction of Helen's body, facing the trees. Meaning, at one point Ethan turned away. He hesitated. He could have left. Maybe almost did. But he turned back. And the carving came after. It was that moment, the pivot, that haunted Detective Farrow most. "He made a decision twice," she said. "The second time wasn't rage. It was ritual." The scar, that is, the bruise under Ethan's eye, had faded by the time of trial. But photos taken days after the murder showed the swelling. A light violet patch spreading from the orbital bone, a healing scratch just beneath his nose, and the beginnings of a black eye. It matched the angle and force of a barefoot kick. Specifically, Helen's right foot, which had a split toenail and trace evidence of Ethan's skin cells beneath it. That kick mattered, because it meant Helen fought, and because it left DNA on the victim herself, an extremely rare scenario in forensic science. Most DNA ends up on weapons, clothing, or under fingernails, the state's forensic analyst testified. This time, the killer's blood was on the bottom of her foot. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because she struck him with everything she had. To the jury, that kick said more than any argument. Helen Brooks had not died passively. She had not just been a victim. She had fought him off, injured him, and in doing so, left behind the evidence that would convict him. Her final act was justice. Years later, that detail would become the focal point of a law school lecture. The idea that a single defensive injury, properly preserved, could unravel the cleanest of crimes. Professor Megan Lee, who had assisted in evidence review during the original case, wrote in her paper, "The blood on Helen Brooks' foot was not just DNA. It was an accusation, a direction, a locked room pointing outward. But not everything had an answer. To this day, no one knows exactly why Ethan chose Helen. He had never spoken to her. She had never threatened him. She had done nothing but exist within range of his fantasy. Was it about control? A need to feel significant? To punish someone for the universe taking his sister? One theory, posited by a behavioral analyst, was simple. Helen was the safest possible victim for a boy who wanted to do something irreversible, but didn't want to feel entirely evil. She was kind, quiet, predictable. Killing her was like smashing a glass swan, delicate, devastating, and completely one-sided. In the prison library where Ethan now works, that symbol, the one he carved into Helen, is nowhere to be seen. He claims he doesn't remember doing it, that the trial feels like a life he watched from far away. He reads now, mostly fiction. He's written essays on Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, and Camus. He once tutored another inmate on calculus. But when asked, off the record, by a parole review specialist whether he believed he was a danger to society, he answered, "I don't think society was ever in danger. Just her." The house was never finished. Wood warped in the sun. Rain crept through the tarp seams. Weeds sprouted through the foundation cracks, like vines reclaiming the land. By the end of the trial, no one walked the hill anymore. The construction crew had packed up. The county permit expired. Michael Brooks stopped visiting. It had been meant to be a place of rebirth. A new chapter. A second marriage, a fresh home, designed by Helen herself. Window placements chosen for sunlight, corners measured to fit antique furniture. The garden mapped out in pencil months before the first stake hit soil. But the house never saw a roof. And Helen never saw a spring. People often say time heals. But time didn't build that house. Time didn't uncarve her back. Time didn't remove the stain from the porch. It only made people stop asking questions. Michael Brooks eventually sold the land. He didn't announce it, just filed the papers and let go. The buyer, a private contractor, tore down the skeletal frame within weeks. What was left behind was an empty ridge and a silence too heavy to explain. He kept the blueprints, though. Helen's handwriting is still in the margins. Years passed. Ethan Weller remained in prison. At first, his name resurfaced every time a new crime hit the news. Talk radio would bring him up. Podcasts would reference his case, the teenage boy who carved symbols and showered after murder. But eventually, even the sensational faded. He became one more file in a long line of disturbed youth, a case study for law students, a name buried under newer headlines. And that suited everyone fine. Except Helen's daughter, Rachel. She was 23 when her mother died. A student, engaged, planning a wedding Helen never got to attend. Rachel testified at the parole hearing in 2030. She brought a photograph, not of the crime scene, not of evidence, but of Helen, barefoot in the garden, laughing beside a tomato plant too tall for the pot it was in. She placed it on the table facing the review board. Then she looked at Ethan, sitting across from her in a pressed gray uniform, hair neatly parted, holding a binder full of GED certificates and self-help program credits. And she asked one question. Do you know what color her eyes were? Ethan didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he never knew. He had never looked. The parole was denied. No drama. No outbursts. Just a signature. And a new date stamped for 5 years later. Rachel left the building alone. Outside, someone from a podcast tried to get a statement. She ignored them. She walked to her car, sat inside, and for 5 full minutes didn't move. Then she drove to Forest Hill Road, where nothing was, where the trailer used to stand, where the house was never finished. They say places forget eventually, but this hill didn't. Not the wind, not the soil, not the birds who never nested in the beams. Remembered her. It remembered the morning she made tea and sat in her sweater. It remembered the moment her fingers slipped off the tablet. It remembered her foot striking out one last time. Helen Brooks lived gently, and she died fighting. And for that, for the resistance etched into bruises, for the evidence left beneath her nails, justice came. Not quickly, not cleanly, but finally. So the next time you drive past an empty lot, or see a house abandoned mid-construction, remember, some walls don't rot because of weather. Some dreams die in silence. And some names, like Helen's, deserve to be spoken aloud.